History periodically likes to repeat itself. Against the background of the current global problem with the Chinese coronavirus pandemic, this story will be quite in topic. In April 1979, events occurred in the Sverdlovsk district of Sverdlovsk, Yekaterinburg, located in the southern part of the city, which we cannot forget even with the most severe information blockade. As in Chinese Wuhan, then unsuspecting residents fell into a cloud of biological weapons that killed many people. A poisoned cloud flew from the bowels of the 19th Military Camp, the secret microbiological center of the Ministry of Defense of the Soviet Union, Military Unit No. 47051. These events were not a local tragedy. And they were not just a biological, genetic and environmental disaster for the inhabitants of those places. These events, now known as the Anthrax epidemic in Sverdlovsk in 1979, were the largest biological catastrophe of the century, which was accompanied by many direct and delayed consequences. It was direct evidence of the readiness of the Soviet Union for a large-scale biological war for destruction. And so, chronology of trouble. According to the most informed person among those who could and wanted to tell the truth about those tragic events, everything happened on Friday, March 30, 1979 at the underground plant for the production of dry-form spores of anthrax, which was carried out in Sverdlovsk to replenish the Soviet arsenals union. As one of the creators of Soviet biological weapons, Colonel KGB Alibekov said a clogged filter was temporarily removed in the afternoon. Due to a misunderstanding, the next shift did not take the necessary actions but continued to work on the night of March 31 already without a filter. A few hours later, the absence of a filter was noticed, after which a new one was delivered, but it was already too late. So overnight, the Sverdlovsk region turned into a military biological testing ground. Different sources call different causes of the disaster, as well as other dates for the beginning of this tragedy, both Monday morning, April 2nd, and April 3rd, and the night from the 3rd to April 4th. It was even called such an extraordinary period as April 13th, moreover, by a fairly knowledgeable person. At one time, the KGB version seemed to be most appropriate that the ejection occurred in the early morning, since it was on the morning of Monday, April 2nd, from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. A northerly wind that well explained the cause of death of people living south of military towns. However, neither the KGB nor meteorologists reported other dates when a north wind also blew. For example, on the night of the 30th to March 31st. So, as now in Wuhan, China, the sloppy work of the Soviet biological weapons factory turned out to be the reason why a cloud of biological weapons covering the southern part of Sverdlovsk escaped from the underground adit that connects military towns No. 19 and No. 32. A cloud of deadly aerosol headed south and southeast of military town No. 19 in the Sverdlovsk district of the city. Part of military camp No. 32, the Torchemet housing estate. A ceramic factory village, private houses, many institutions, numerous kindergartens and schools, several colonies for prisoners fell under it. Since the territory of the Military Biological Center Sverdlovsk-19 did not fall into the affected area, its inhabitants watched what was happening from the side. The first candidates for the defeat from the pathogenic cloud were everyone who in those days ended up on the streets covered by him, factory shift workers, children in a hurry to kindergartens and schools, prisoners, military personnel of Town 32, Sverdlovsk Motorized Infantry Division, young fighter courses, retraining courses, reserve officers. So, the chronology of events is as follows. March 30, 1979, anthrax spores were released from the Sverdlovsk-19 complex from an underground plant for the manufacture of dry forms of anthrax spores. April 2, the first death of a person from anthrax, an employee of the town of Sverdlovsk-19 F.D. Nikolaev. In the afternoon of April 2, the transfer of officers of the town number 32 to the barracks. April 4, the arrival in Sverdlovsk of the chief of the 15th Directorate of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the USSR, Colonel General Smirnov. Also, on April 4, specialists from the USSR Ministry of Health arrived in Moscow. Deputy Minister of Health, the Chief State Sanitary Doctor of the USSR, General Burgasov, as well as the Chief Infectious Disease Specialist of the USSR Ministry of Health, Nikiforov. They were sent by the Minister of Health Petrovsky to combat an epidemic that the doctors of the affected city did not yet know about. General Burgasov stayed in Sverdlovsk until May 14. Nikiforov until the end of the epidemic. Day and evening on April 4, 1979, the appearance of the first sick and deceased civilians, primarily among the workers of the ceramic factory. They ended their lives in the morgue of the 20th hospital with a diagnosis of pneumonia. In the afternoon of April 3, the death of animals, goats of the Ignatia family. Later many dogs and sheep fell. April 3 and 4, continuous medical examination and vaccination of the scientific personnel of military camp number 19. The military builders living on the campus territory were not subject to vaccination. Starting on April 5, 1979, 5 or more civilians in the city died every day in the disaster area for 3 weeks. They went through the morgues of the 24th, 20th, 40th and other hospitals. Mortality decreases only in the third decade of April. April 10, 1979, the first autopsy performed by civilian doctors in the city hospital No. 40. Earlier data on the autopsies of the victims carried out in the military town of Sverdlovsk-19 are still hidden from the public. And only on April 10, 1979, giving the diagnosis of skin form of anthrax an official status among the civil medical circles of the city. The authorship of the diagnosis is attributed to Abramova. April 12, 1979, the allocation of a corps in the 40th City Hospital to organize a special department for 500 beds. This is the maximum number of patients who were expected at the peak of the epidemic. And only on April 13, 1979, and that was solely for averting eyes and suspicion in the newspapers of Sverdlovsk. Modest publications appeared warning citizens against infection with the skin form of anthrax in connection with the consumption of meat of fallen animals. And on the same date, April 13, 1979, they began to organize the buried in an organized manner. They were concentrated in the 15th sector of the Eastern Cemetery. Among the first to be buried, Nikolaev, officer of Sverdlovsk-19, born in 1912. On a pedestal it is written that he died on April 9, but it is believed that it was from this person that the death account began. Retnov, ensign of military town number 32, was born 1938, died April 9. Vinogradov, a ceramic factory worker, born in 1927, died April 9. Markov, a ceramic factory worker, born in 1932, died April 9. Zakharov, a ceramic factory worker, born in 1934, died April 9. Ivanov, a worker at a meat processing plant, was born in 1930, died on April 10. Dian, born in 1936, died on April 10. April 21, 1979, the beginning of continuous vaccination of the civilian population and disinfection of the territory of the Shkarlovsky district and the emergence of a second wave of mortality among civilians. Among the dead, Makarov, born in 1931, died April 24. Major Sannikov, born in 1947, died April 25. June 12, 1979, the death of the last victim in the area of the anthrax epidemic. November 1979, publication in a magazine published in Western Germany by Soviet emigrants in Russian. It was reported that in April at a military factory in a suburb of Sverdlovsk, deadly bacteria were released into the atmosphere due to an explosion. And only in May 1980 was the report of the Soviet Scientific Journal of Microbiology, Epidemiology and Immunology about individual cases of anthrax diseases in Sverdlovsk in 1979. June 12, 1980, TASS reports that the events of 1979 in Sverdlovsk were associated with a natural outbreak of anthrax among domestic animals. August-November 1990, getting into the Soviet press the first information about the real source of the deadly cloud, the military town of Sverdlovsk 19. April 4, 1992, Yeltsin signed the law of the Russian Federation on improving the retirement benefits of families of citizens who died as a result of anthrax in Sverdlovsk in 1979. Spring 1998, the erosion due to rains overdumped with stored waste from disinfection of the territory in the epidemic area in Sverdlovsk. Waste fell into the river. P.S. Around the establishment and legalization of the diagnosis of people affected by the epidemic in Sverdlovsk in 1979, there was an extremely large number of politicians. Too much. Even for a very dangerous event, if it did not affect the foundations of the strategic interests of the Soviet Union. The diagnosis of skin form of anthrax became official in the medical circles of the city only on April 10 and was the basis for the treatment of not all patients but only hospitalized ones. The disease was hidden from the uninitiated under the name of sepsis 002, according to some sources, sepsis 022. However, the first preventive newspaper publication appeared only on the 11th day after the outbreak, when several dozen people died. Although the onset of the disease during the epidemic was quite common. Fever, dry cough, chills, dizziness, headache, nausea, weakness. The course of the disease was hurricane, and death occurred in various places, on the street, at home, in line for a doctor's appointment. But despite the numerous deaths and the official status of the anthrax diagnosis, he was not allowed to be included in the death certificates of citizens who died. According to official reports from this disease, standard records were different: acute respiratory infections, pneumonia, bacterial pneumonia, poisoning with unknown poison, sepsis, heart attack, and others. The substitution of diagnoses also took place in Sverdlovsk 19. The officer of the Department of Logistics of Nikolaev, who died first, was buried with the diagnosis of pneumonia. In the medical history of people who were treated for anthrax in April 1979, military doctors write down any diagnoses, except for the true one, just to take the tracks away from the truth. Subsequently, the KGB prepared an official list of only 96 people who were considered ill with anthrax between April 4 and May 18. This document was created as part of an official cover operation to orient medical circles, primarily foreign ones, and in this capacity it fully achieved the goal. Since the KGB document was prepared specifically, only 17 people with a cutaneous form of the disease were entered into it. All of them remained alive. The remaining 79 were attributed not to pulmonary inhalation, but to the intestinal form of the disease. The pulmonary form was not specifically indicated, supposedly. It was not detected, and only 64 people are considered dead as a result of the epidemic. All of them were included in the second part of the list. The data of this list remain canonized to this day, both in terms of the number of deaths and the form of the disease. Meanwhile, the anthrax disease should have been not pulmonary, but pulmonary. And the pathogen did not reach people through food and the intestines, but through the air, through the lungs. Moreover, this airborne aerosol infection occurred in late March and the first days of April, as a result of leakage of anthrax spores from the bowels of the 19th Military Camp, a secret microbiological center. This substitution remains official to this day. It is not surprising, in Russia, as in the USSR, all data on the incidence of anthrax remained secret, starting with the 1927 epidemic in Yaroslavl. So rechecking is impossible today. And this means that the lessons from this story have not been learned, and these events can be repeated. And yet they repeat.